Ender sat in a corner of the battle room, his arm hooked through a handhold, watching Bean practice with his squad. Yesterday they had worked on attacks without guns, disarming enemies with their feet. Ender had helped them with some techniques from gravity personal combat. Many things had to be changed, but inertia in flight was a tool that could be used against the enemy as easily in nullo as in Earth gravity. Today, though, Bean had a new toy. It was a deadline, one of the thin, almost invisible twines used during construction in space to hold two objects together. Deadlines were sometimes kilometers long. This one was just a bit longer than a wall of the battle room, and yet it looped easily, almost invisibly, around Bean's waist. He pulled it off like an article of clothing and handed one end to one of his soldiers. "Hook it to a handhold and wind it around a few times." Bean carried the other end across the battle room. As a tripwire, it wasn't too useful, Bean decided. It was invisible enough, but one strand of twine wouldn't have much chance of stopping an enemy that could easily go above or below it. Then he got the idea of using it to change his direction of movement in midair. He fastened it around his waist, the other end still fastened to a handhold, slipped a few meters away, and launched himself straight out. The twine caught him, changed his direction abruptly, and swung him in an arc that crashed him brutally against the wall. He screamed and screamed. It took Ender a moment to realize that he wasn't screaming in pain. "Did you see how fast I went? Did you see how I changed direction?" Soon, all of Dragon Army stopped work to watch Bean practice with the twine. The changes in direction were stunning, especially when you didn't know where to look for the twine. When he used the twine to wrap himself around a star, he attained speeds no one had ever seen before. It was 21:40 when Ender dismissed the evening practice. Weary, but delighted at having seen something new, his army walked through the corridors back to the barracks. Ender walked among them, not talking but listening to their talk. They were tired, yes. A battle every day for more than 4 weeks, often in situations that tested their abilities to the utmost. But they were proud, happy, close. They had never lost, and they had learned to trust each other. They trusted their fellow soldiers to fight hard and well, trusted their leaders to use them rather than waste their efforts. Above all, they trusted Ender to prepare them for anything and everything that might happen. As they walked the corridor, Ender noticed several older boys seemingly engaged in conversations in branching corridors and ladderways. Some were in their corridor, walking slowly in the other direction. It became too much of a coincidence, however, that so many of them were wearing salamander uniforms, and that those who weren't were often older boys belonging to armies whose commanders most hated Ender Wiggin. A few of them looked at him and looked away too quickly. Others were too tense, too nervous, as they pretended to be relaxed. What will I do if they attack my army here in the corridor? My boys are all young, all small, and completely untrained in gravity combat. When would they learn? "Ho, Ender!" someone called. Ender stopped and looked back. It was Petra. "Ender, can I talk to you?" Ender saw in a moment that if he stopped and talked, his army would quickly pass him by and he would be alone with Petra in the hallway. "Walk with me," Ender said. "It's just for a moment." Ender turned around and walked on with his army. He heard Petra running to catch up. "All right, I'll walk with you." Ender tensed when she came near. Was she one of them, one of the ones who hated him enough to hurt him? "A friend of yours wanted me to warn you. There are some boys who want to kill you." "Surprise," said Ender. Some of his soldiers seemed to perk up at this. Plots against their commander were interesting news, it seemed. "Ender, they can do it. He said they've been planning it ever since you went commander. Ever since I beat Salamander, you mean?" "I hated you after you beat Phoenix Army, too, Ender. I didn't say I blamed anybody. It's true. He told me to take you aside today and warn you on the way back from the battle room to be careful tomorrow because, Petra, if you had actually taken me aside just now, there are about a dozen boys following along who would have taken me in the corridor. Can you tell me you didn't notice them?" Suddenly her face flushed. "No, I didn't." How can you think I did? Don't you know who your friends are?" She pushed her way through Dragon Army, got ahead of him, and scrambled up a ladderway to a higher deck. "Is it true?" asked Crazy Tom. "Is what true?" Ender scanned the room and shouted for two roughhousing boys to get to bed. "That some of the older boys want to kill you." "All talk," said Ender. But he knew that it wasn't. Petra had known something, and what he saw on the way here tonight wasn't imagination. "It may be all talk, but I hope you'll understand when I say you got 5 toon leaders who are going to escort you to your room tonight. Completely unnecessary. Humor us. You owe us a favor." "I owe you nothing." He'd be a fool to turn them down. "Do as you want." He turned and left. The toon leaders trotted along with him. One ran ahead and opened his door. They checked the room, made Ender promise to lock it, and left him just before lights out. There was a message on his desk. "Don't be alone, ever, Dink." Ender grinned. So Dink was still his friend. "Don't worry, they won't do anything to me. I have my army." But in the darkness he did not have his army. He dreamed that night of Stilson, only he saw now how small Stilson was, only 6 years old, how ridiculous his tough guy posturing was. And yet in the dream Stilson and his friends tied Ender so he couldn't fight back, and then everything that Ender had done to Stilson in life, they did to Ender in the dream. And afterward Ender saw himself babbling like an idiot, trying hard to give orders to his army, but all his words came out as nonsense. He awoke in darkness, and he was afraid. Then he calmed himself by remembering that the teachers obviously valued him, or they wouldn't be putting so much pressure on him. They wouldn't let anything happen to him, nothing bad anyway. Probably when the older kids attacked him in the battle room years ago, there were teachers just outside the room waiting to see what would happen. If things had got out of hand, they would have stepped in and stopped it. I probably could have sat there and done nothing, and they would have seen to it that I came through all right. They'll push me as hard as they can in the game, but outside the game they'll keep me safe. With that assurance he slept again, until the door opened softly, and the morning's war was left on the floor for him to find. They won, of course, but it was a grueling affair, with the battle room so filled with a labyrinth of stars that hunting down the enemy during mop-up took 45 minutes. It was Paul Slattery's Badger Army, and they refused to give up. There was a new wrinkle in the game, too. When they disabled or damaged an enemy, he thawed in about 5 minutes, the way it worked in practice. Only when the enemy was completely frozen did he stay out of action the whole time. But the gradual thawing did not work for Dragon Army. Crazy Tom was the one who realized what was happening when they started getting hit from behind by people they thought were safely out of the way. And at the end of the battle, Slattery shook Ender's hand and said, "I'm glad you won. If I ever beat you, Ender, I want to do it fair." "Use what they give you," Ender said. "If you've ever got an advantage over the enemy, use it." "Oh, I did," said Slattery. He grinned. "I'm only fair-minded before and after battles." The battle took so long that breakfast was over. Ender looked at his hot, sweating, tired soldiers waiting in the corridor and said, "Today you know everything. No practice. Get some rest. Have some fun. Pass a test." It was a measure of their weariness that they didn't even cheer or laugh or smile. Just walked into the barracks and stripped off their clothes. They would have practiced if he had asked them to, but they were reaching the end of their strength, and going without breakfast was one unfairness too many. Ender meant to shower right away, but he was also tired. He lay down on his bed in his flash suit, just for a moment, and woke up at the beginning of lunchtime. So much for his idea of studying more about the buggers this morning. Just time to clean up, go eat, and head for class. He peeled off his flash suit, which stank from his sweat. His body felt cold, his joints oddly weak. Shouldn't have slept in the middle of the day. I'm beginning to slack off. I'm beginning to wear down. Can't let it get to me. So he jogged to the gym and forced himself to climb the rope 3 times before going to the bathroom to shower. It didn't occur to him that his absence in the commander's mess would be noticed, that showering during the noon hour when his own army would be wolfing down their first meal of the day, he would be completely, helplessly alone. Even when he heard them come into the bathroom, he paid no attention. He was letting the water pour over his head, over his body. The muffled sound of footsteps was hardly noticeable. Maybe lunch was over, he thought. He started to soap himself again. Maybe somebody finished practice late. And maybe not. He turned around. There were 7 of them, leaning back against the metal sinks or standing closer to the showers, watching him. Bonzo stood in front of them. Many were smiling, the condescending leer of the hunter for his cornered victim. Bonzo was not smiling, however. "Ho," Ender said. Nobody answered. So Ender turned off the shower, even though there was still soap on him, and reached for his towel. It wasn't there. One of the boys was holding it. It was Bernard. All it would take for the picture to be complete was for Stillson and Peter to be there too. They needed Peter's smile. They needed Stillson's obvious stupidity. Ender recognized the towel as their opening point. Nothing would make him look weaker than to chase naked after the towel. That was what they wanted, to humiliate him, to break him down. He wasn't going to play. He refused to feel weak because he was wet and cold and unclothed. He stood strongly, facing them, his arms at his sides. He fastened his gaze on Bonzo. "Your move," Ender said. "This is no game," said Bernard. "We're tired of you, Ender. You graduate today. On ice." Ender did not look at Bernard. It was Bonzo who hungered for his death, even though he was silent. The others were along for the ride, daring themselves to see how far they might go. Bonzo knew how far he would go. "Bonzo," Ender said softly, "your father would be proud of you." Bonzo stiffened. "He would love to see you now, come to fight a naked boy in a shower smaller than you, and you brought 6 friends. He would say, 'Oh, what honor.'" "Nobody came to fight you," said Bernard. "We just came to talk you into playing fair with the games, maybe lose a couple now and then." The others laughed, but Bonzo didn't laugh, and neither did Ender. "Be proud, Bonito, pretty boy. You can go home and tell your father, yes, I beat up Ender Wiggin, who was barely 10 years old, and I was 13. And I had only 6 of my friends to help me, and somehow we managed to defeat him, even though he was naked and wet and alone. Ender Wiggin is so dangerous and terrifying, it was all we could do not to bring 200. "Shut your mouth, Wiggin," said one of the boys. "We didn't come to hear the little bastard talk," said another. "You shut up," said Bonzo. "Shut up and stand out of the way." He began to take off his uniform. "Naked and wet and alone, Ender, so we're even. I can't help that I'm bigger than you. You're such a genius, you figure out how to handle me." He turned to the others. "Watch the door. Don't let anyone else in." The bathroom wasn't large, and plumbing fixtures protruded everywhere. It had been launched in one piece as a low-orbit satellite, packed full of the water reclamation equipment. It was designed to have no wasted space. It was obvious what their tactics would have to be. Throw the other boy against fixtures until one of them does enough damage that he stops. When Ender saw Bonzo's stance, his heart sank. Bonzo had also taken classes, and probably more recently than Ender. His reach was better, he was stronger, and he was full of hate. He would not be gentle. "He will go for my head," thought Ender. "He will try above all to damage my brain. And if this fight is long, he's bound to win. His strength can control me. If I'm to walk away from here, I have to win quickly and permanently." He could still feel again the sickening way that Stillson's bones had given way. "But this time it will be my body that breaks, unless I can break him first." Ender stepped back, flipped the shower head so it turned outward, and turned on pure hot water. Almost at once the steam began to rise. He turned on the next, and the next. "I'm not afraid of hot water," said Bonzo. His voice was soft. But it wasn't the hot water that Ender wanted, it was the heat. His body still had soap on it, and his sweat moistened it, made his skin more slippery than Bonzo would expect. Suddenly there was a voice from the door. "Stop it!" For a moment Ender thought it was a teacher come to stop the fight, but it was only Dink Meeker. Bonzo's friends caught him at the door, held him. "Stop it, Bonzo!" Dink cried. "Don't hurt him." "Why not?" asked Bonzo. And for the first time he smiled. Ah, thought Ender, he loves to have someone recognize that he is the one in control, that he has power. Because he's the best, that's why. Who else can fight the buggers? That's what matters, you fool, the buggers. Bonzo stopped smiling. It was the thing he hated most about Ender, that Ender really mattered to other people, and in the end, Bonzo did not. You've killed me with those words, Dink. Bonzo doesn't want to hear that I might save the world. Where are the teachers, thought Ender. Don't they realize that the first contact between us in this fight might be the end of it? This isn't like the fight in the battle room, where no one had the leverage to do any terrible damage. There's gravity in here, and the floor and walls are hard and jutted with metal. Stop this now or not at all. If you touch him, you're a bugger lover, cried Dink. You're a traitor. If you touch him, you deserve to die. They jammed Dink's face backward into the door, and he was silent. The mist from the showers dimmed the room, and the sweat was streaming down Ender's body. Now, before the soap is carried off me, now, while I'm still too slippery to hold. Ender stepped back, letting the fear he felt show in his face. Bonzo, don't hurt me, he said. Please. It was what Bonzo was waiting for, the confession that he was in power. For other boys it might have been enough that Ender had submitted. For Bonzo, it was only a sign that his victory was sure. He swung his leg as if to kick, but changed it to a leap at the last moment. Ender noticed the shifting weight and stooped lower so that Bonzo would be more off balance when he tried to grab Ender and throw him. Bonzo's tight, hard ribs came against Ender's face, and his hands slapped against his back, trying to grip him. But Ender twisted, and Bonzo's hands slipped. In an instant, Ender was completely turned, yet still inside Bonzo's grasp. The classic move at this moment would be to bring up his heel into Bonzo's crotch. But for that move to be effective required too much accuracy, and Bonzo expected it. He was already rising onto his toes, thrusting his hips backward to keep Ender from reaching his groin. Without seeing him, Ender knew it would bring his face closer, almost in Ender's hair, so instead of kicking, he lunged upward off the floor with the most powerful lunge of the soldier bounding from the wall and jammed his head into Bonzo's face. Ender whirled in time to see Bonzo stagger backward, his nose bleeding, gasping from surprise and pain. Ender knew that at this moment he might be able to walk out of the room and end the battle, the way he had escaped from the battle room after drawing blood. But the battle would only be fought again and again until the will to fight was finished. The only way to end things completely was to hurt Bonzo enough that his fear was stronger than his hate. So Ender leaned back against the wall behind him, then jumped up and pushed off with his arms. His feet landed in Bonzo's belly and chest. Ender spun in the air and landed on his toes and hands. He flipped over, scooted under Bonzo, and this time when he kicked upward into Bonzo's crotch, he connected hard and sure. Bonzo did not cry out in pain. He did not react at all, except that his body rose a little in the air. It was as if Ender had kicked a piece of furniture. Bonzo collapsed, fell to the side, and sprawled directly under the spray of steaming water from a shower. He made no movement whatever to escape the murderous heat. "My God!" someone shouted. Bonzo's friends leaped to turn off the water. Ender slowly rose to his feet. Someone thrust his towel at him. It was Dink. "Come on out of here," Dink said. He led Ender away. Behind them they heard the heavy clatter of adults running down the ladderway. Now the teachers would come, the medical staff, to dress the wounds of Ender's enemy. Where were they before the fight, when there might have been no wounds at all? There was no doubt now in Ender's mind. There was no help for him. Whatever he faced, now and forever, no one would save him from it. Peter might be scum, but Peter had been right, always right. The power to cause pain is the only power that matters, the power to kill and destroy. Because if you can't kill, then you are always subject to those who can, and nothing and no one will ever save you. Dink led him to his room, made him lie on the bed. "Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked. Ender shook his head. "You took him apart. I thought you were dead meat, the way he grabbed you. But you took him apart. If he'd stood up longer, you would have killed him." "He meant to kill me." "I know it. I know him. Nobody hates like Bonzo. But not anymore. If they don't, ice him for this and send him home, he'll never look you in the eye again, you or anybody. He had 20 centimeters on you, and you made him look like a crippled cow standing there chewing her cud. All Ender could see, though, was the way Bonzo looked as Ender kicked upward into his groin. The empty, dead look in his eyes. He was already finished then, already unconscious. His eyes were open, but he wasn't thinking or moving anymore. Just that dead, stupid look on his face, that terrible look. The way Stilson looked when I finished with him. "They'll ice him, though," Dink said. "Everybody knows he started it. I saw them get up and leave the commander's mess. Took me a couple of seconds to realize you weren't there either, and then a minute more to find out where you'd gone. I told you not to be alone. Sorry. They're bound to ice him. Troublemaker. Him and his stinking honor." Then, to Dink's surprise, Ender began to cry. Lying on his back, still soaking wet with sweat and water. He gasped his sobs, tears seeping out of his closed eyelids and disappearing in the water on his face. "Are you all right?" "I didn't want to hurt him," Ender cried. "Why didn't he just leave me alone?" He heard his door open softly, then close. He knew at once that it was his battle instructions. He opened his eyes, expecting to find the darkness of early morning before 0600. Instead, the lights were on. He was naked, and when he moved, the bed was soaking wet. His eyes were puffy and painful from crying. He looked at the clock on his desk. 1820, it said. It's the same day. I already had a battle today. I had 2 battles today. The bastards know what I've been through, and they're doing this to me. William B. Griffin Army, Talo Momo, Tiger Army, 1900. He sat on the edge of the bed. The note trembled in his hand. I can't do this, he said silently. And then not silently. I can't do this. He got up, bleary, and looked for his flash suit. Then he remembered he had put it in the cleaner while he showered. It was still there. Holding the paper, he walked out of his room. Dinner was nearly over, and there were a few people in the corridor, but no one spoke to him, just watched him, perhaps in awe of what had happened at noon in the bathroom, perhaps because of the forbidding, terrible look on his face. Most of his boys were in the barracks. Ho, Ender, there going to be a practice tonight? Ender handed the paper to Hot Soup. Those sons of bitches, he said. 2 at once. 2 armies? Shouted Crazy Tom. They'll just trip over each other, said Bean. I've got to clean up, Ender said. Get them ready, get everybody together. I'll meet you there, at the gate. He walked out of the barracks. A tumult of conversation rose behind him. He heard Crazy Tom scream, 2 fart-eating armies will whip their butts! The bathroom was empty, all cleaned up. None of the blood that poured from Bonzo's nose into the shower water. All gone. Nothing bad ever happened here. Ender stepped under the water and rinsed himself, took the sweat of combat and let it run down the drain. All gone, except they recycled it and will be drinking Bonzo's blood water in the morning. All the life gone out of it, but his blood just the same. His blood and my sweat, washed down in their stupidity or cruelty or whatever it was that made them let it happen. He dried himself, dressed in his flash suit, and walked to the battle room. His army was waiting in the corridor, the door still not opened. They watched him in silence as he walked to the front to stand by the blank gray force field. Of course, they all knew about his fight in the bathroom today. That and their own weariness from the battle that morning kept them quiet, while the knowledge that they would be facing 2 armies filled them with dread. Everything they can do to beat me, thought Ender. Everything they can think of. Change all the rules. They don't care, just so they beat me. Well, I'm sick of the game. No game is worth Bonzo's blood pinking the water on the bathroom floor. Ice me. Send me home. I don't want to play anymore. The door disappeared. Only 3 meters out, there were 4 stars together, completely blocking the view from the door. 2 armies weren't enough. They had to make Ender deploy his forces blind. Bean, said Ender, take your boys and tell me what's on the other side of this star. Bean pulled the coil of twine from his waist, tied one end around him, handed the other end to a boy in his squad, and stepped gently through the door. His squad quickly followed. They had practiced this several times, and it took only a moment before they were braced on the star, holding the end of the twine. Bean pushed off at great speed, in a line almost parallel to the door. When he reached the corner of the room, he pushed off again and rocketed straight out toward the enemy. The spots of light on the wall showed that the enemy was shooting at him. As the rope was stopped by each edge of the star in turn, his arc became tighter, his direction changed, and he became an impossible target to hit. His squad caught him neatly as he came around the star from the other side. He moved all his arms and legs so those waiting inside the door would know that the enemy hadn't flashed him anywhere. Ender dropped through the gate. "It's really dim," said Bean, "but light enough you can't follow people easily by the lights on their suits. Worst possible for seeing. It's all open space from this star to the enemy side of the room. They've got 8 stars making a square around their door. I didn't see anybody except the ones peeking around the boxes. They're just sitting there waiting for us." As if to corroborate Bean's statement, the enemy began to call out to them. "Hey, we be hungry. Come and feed us. Your ass is dragon. Your ass is dragon." Ender's mind felt dead. This was stupid. He didn't have a chance, outnumbered 2-1 and forced to attack a protected enemy. In a real war, any commander with brains at all would retreat and save his army. "What the hell," said Bean. "It's only a game." It stopped being a game when they threw away the rules. "So you threw them away too?" Ender grinned. "Okay. Why not? Let's see how they react to a formation." Bean was appalled. "A formation? We've never done a formation in the whole time we've been an army." "Well, you've still got a month to go before our training period is normally supposed to end. About time we started doing formations. Always have to know formations." He formed an A with his fingers, showed it to the blank door, and beckoned. A tune quickly emerged, and Ender began arranging them behind the star. 3 meters wasn't enough room to work in. The boys were frightened and confused, and it took nearly 5 minutes just to get them to understand what they were doing. Tiger and Griffin soldiers were reduced to chanting catcalls while their commanders argued about whether to try to use their overwhelming force to attack Dragon Army while they were still behind the star. Momo was all for attacking. "We outnumber him 2-1, while B said, 'Sit tight and we can't lose. Move out and he can figure out a way to beat us.' So they sat tight, until finally in the dusky light they saw a large mass slip out from behind Ender's star. It held its shape even when it abruptly stopped moving sideways and launched itself toward the dead center of the 8 stars, where 82 soldiers waited. "Do-be-do," said a Griffin. "They're doing a formation." "They must have been putting that together for all 5 minutes," said Momo. "If we'd attacked while they were doing it, we could have destroyed them." "Eat it, Momo," whispered B. "You saw the way that little kid flew. He went all the way around the star and back behind without ever touching a wall. Maybe they've all got hooks. Did you think of that? They've got something new there." The formation was a strange one. A square formation of tightly packed bodies in front making a wall. Behind it, a cylinder, 6 boys in circumference and 2 boys deep, their limbs outstretched and frozen so they couldn't possibly be holding on to each other. Yet they held together as tightly as if they had been tied, which in fact they were. From inside the formation, Dragon Army was firing with deadly accuracy, forcing Griffins and Tigers to stay tightly packed on their stars. "The back of that sucker is open," said B. "As soon as they get between the stars, we can get around behind." "Don't talk about it, do it," said Momo. Then he took his own advice and ordered his boys to launch against the wall and rebound out behind the Dragon formation. In the chaos of their takeoff, while Griffin Army held tight to their stars, the Dragon formation abruptly changed. Both the cylinder and the front wall split in 2 as boys inside it pushed off. Almost at once, the formations also reversed direction, heading back toward the Dragon Gate. Most of the Griffins fired at the formations, and the boys moving backward with them, and the Tigers took the survivors of Dragon Army from behind. But there was something wrong. William B. thought for a moment and realized what it was. Those formations couldn't have reversed direction in mid-flight unless someone pushed off in the opposite direction, and if they took off with enough force to make that 20-man formation move backward, they must be going fast. There they were, 6 small Dragon soldiers down near William B.'s own door. From the number of lights showing on their flash suits, B could see that 3 of them were disabled and 2 of them damaged. Only 1 was whole. Nothing to be frightened of. B casually aimed at them, pressed the button, and nothing happened. The lights went on. The game was over. Even though he was looking right at them, it took B a moment to realize what had just happened. 4 of the dragon soldiers had their helmets pressed on the corners of the door, and 1 of them had just passed through. They had just carried out the victory ritual. They were getting destroyed, they had hardly inflicted any casualties, and they had the gall to perform the victory and end the game right under their noses. Only then did it occur to William B. that not only had Dragon Army ended the game, it was possible that under the rules they had won it. After all, no matter what happened, you were not certified as the winner unless you had enough unfrozen soldiers to touch the corners of the gate and pass someone through into the enemy's corridor. Therefore, by one way of thinking, you could argue that the ending ritual was victory. The battle room certainly recognized it as the end of the game. The teacher gate opened and Major Anderson came into the room. "Ender," he called, looking around. One of the frozen dragon soldiers tried to answer him through jaws that were clamped shut by the flash suit. Anderson hooked over to him and thawed him. Ender was smiling. "I beat you again, sir," he said. "Nonsense, Ender," Anderson said softly. "Your battle was with Griffin and Tiger." "How stupid do you think I am?" said Ender. Loudly, Anderson said, "After that little maneuver, the rules are being revised to require that all of the enemy's soldiers must be frozen or disabled before the gate can be reversed." "They could only work once anyway," Ender said. Anderson handed him the hook. Ender unfroze everyone at once. To hell with protocol. To hell with everything. "Hey!" he shouted as Anderson moved away. "What is it next time? My army in a cage without guns with the rest of the battle school against them? How about a little equality?" There was a loud murmur of agreement from the other boys, and not all of it came from Dragon Army. Anderson did not so much as turn around to acknowledge Ender's challenge. Finally, it was William B. who answered. "Ender, if you're on one side of the battle, it won't be equal no matter what the conditions are." "Right," called the boys. Many of them laughed. Talo Momo began clapping his hands. "Ender Wiggin!" he shouted. The other boys also clapped and shouted Ender's name. Ender passed through the enemy gate. His soldiers followed him. The sound of them shouting his name followed him through the corridors. "Practice tonight?" asked Crazy Tom. Ender shook his head. "Tomorrow morning, then?" "No." "Well, when?" "Never again, as far as I'm concerned." He could hear the murmurs behind him. "Hey, that's not fair," said one of the boys. "It's not our fault the teachers are screwing up the game. You can't just stop teaching us stuff because—" Ender slammed his open hand against the wall and shouted at the boy. "I don't care about the game anymore." His voice echoed through the corridor. Boys from other armies came to their doors. He spoke quietly into the silence. "Do you understand that?" And he whispered, "The game is over." He walked back to his room alone. He wanted to lie down, but he couldn't because the bed was wet. It reminded him of all that had happened today, and in fury he tore the mattress and blankets from the bed frame and shoved them out into the corridor. Then he wadded up a uniform to serve as a pillow and lay on the fabric of wires strung across the frame. It was uncomfortable, but Ender didn't care enough to get up. He had only been there a few minutes when someone knocked on the door. "Go away," he said softly. Whoever was knocking didn't hear him or didn't care. Finally, Ender said to come in. It was Bean. "Go away, Bean." Bean nodded but didn't leave. Instead, he looked at his shoes. Ender almost yelled at him, cursed at him, screamed at him to leave. Instead, he noticed how very tired Bean looked, his whole body bent with weariness, his eyes dark from lack of sleep. And yet his skin was still soft and translucent, the skin of a child, the soft, curved cheek, the slender limbs of a little boy. He wasn't 8 years old yet. It didn't matter he was brilliant and dedicated and good. He was a child. He was young. No, he isn't, thought Ender. Small, yes. But Bean has been through a battle with a whole army depending on him and on the soldiers that he led, and he performed splendidly, and they won. There's no youth in that, no childhood. Taking Ender's silence and softening expression as permission to stay, Bean took another step into the room. Only then did Ender see the small slip of paper in his hand. "You're transferred?" asked Ender. He was incredulous, but his voice came out sounding uninterested, dead. "To Rabbit Army." Ender nodded. "Of course, it was obvious. If I can't be defeated with my army, they'll take my army away." "Karn Karby's a good man," said Ender. "I hope he recognizes what you're worth. Karn Karby was graduated today. He got his notice while we were fighting our battle." "Well, who's commanding Rabbit, then?" Bean held his hands out helplessly. "Me." Ender looked at the ceiling and nodded. "Of course. After all, you're only 4 years younger than the regular age." "It isn't funny. I don't know what's going on here. All the changes in the game and now this. I wasn't the only one transferred, you know. They graduated half the commanders and transferred a lot of our guys to command their armies." "Which guys?" "It looks like every toon leader and every assistant." "Of course. If they decide to wreck my army, they'll cut it to the ground. Whatever they're doing, they're thorough." "You still win, Ender. We all know that. Crazy Tom, he said, 'You mean I'm supposed to figure out how to beat Dragon Army?' Everybody knows you're the best. They can't break you down no matter what they already have." "No, Ender. They can't. I don't care about their game anymore, Bean. I'm not going to play it anymore. No more practices, no more battles. They can put their little slips of paper on the floor all they want, but I won't go. I decided that before I went through the door today. That's why I had you go for the gate. I didn't think it would work, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go out in style." "You should have seen William B.'s face. He just stood there trying to figure out how he had lost when you only had 7 boys who could wiggle their toes, and he only had 3 who couldn't." "Why should I want to see William B.'s face? Why should I want to beat anybody?" Ender pressed his palms against his eyes. "I hurt Bonzo really bad today, Bean. I really hurt him bad. He had it coming. I knocked him out standing up. It was like he was dead, standing there, and I kept hurting him." Bean said nothing. "I just wanted to make sure he never hurt me again." "He won't," said Bean. "They sent him home already. The teachers didn't say much. They never do. The official notice says he was graduated, but where they put the assignment, you know, tactical school support, pre-command, navigation, that kind of thing, it just said, Cartagena, Spain. That's his home. I'm glad they graduated him." "Hell, Ender, we're just glad he's gone. If we'd known what he was doing to you, we would have killed him on the spot. Was it true he had a whole bunch of guys gang up on you?" "No, it was just him and me. He fought with honor." "If it weren't for his honor, he and the others would have beaten me together. They might have killed me then. His sense of honor saved my life." "I didn't fight with honor," Ender added. "I fought to win." Bean laughed. "And you did. Kicked him right out of orbit." A knock on the door. Before Ender could answer, the door opened. Ender had been expecting more of his soldiers. Instead, it was Major Anderson, and behind him came Colonel Graff. "Ender Wiggin," said Graff. Ender got to his feet. "Yes, sir." "Your display of temper in the battle room today was insubordinate and is not to be repeated." "Yes, sir," said Ender. Bean was still feeling insubordinate, and he didn't think Ender deserved the rebuke. "I think it was about time somebody told a teacher how we felt about what you've been doing." The adults ignored him. Anderson handed Ender a sheet of paper. A full-sized sheet, not one of the little slips of paper that served for internal orders within the battle school. It was a full-fledged set of orders. Bean knew what it meant. Ender was being transferred out of the school. "Graduated?" asked Bean. Ender nodded. "What took them so long? You're only 2 or 3 years early. You've already learned how to walk and talk and dress yourself. What will they have left to teach you?" Ender shook his head. "All I know is the game's over." He folded up the paper. "None too soon. Can I tell my army?" "There isn't time," said Graff. Your shuttle leaves in 20 minutes. Besides, it's better not to talk to them after you get your orders. It makes it easier. For them or for you? Ender asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned quickly to Bean, took his hand for a moment, and then headed for the door. Wait, said Bean. Where are you going? Tactical, navigational, support? Command school, Ender answered. Pre-command? Command, said Ender. And then he was out the door. Anderson followed him closely. Bean grabbed Colonel Graff by the sleeve. Nobody goes to command school unless they're 16. Graff shook off Bean's hand and left, closing the door behind him.
Bean stood alone in the room, trying to grasp what this might mean. Nobody went to command school without 3 years of pre-command in either tactical or support. But then, nobody left battle school without at least 6 years, and Ender had had only 4. The system is breaking up. No doubt about it. Either somebody at the top is going crazy, or something's gone wrong with the war. The real war. The bugger war. Why else would they break down the training system like this? Wreck the game the way they did? Why else would they put a little kid like me in command of an army? Bean wondered about it as he walked back down the corridor to his own bed. The lights went out just as he reached his bunk. He undressed in darkness, fumbling to put his clothing in a locker he couldn't see. He felt terrible. At first he thought he felt bad because he was afraid of leading an army, but it wasn't true. He knew he'd make a good commander. He felt himself wanting to cry. He hadn't cried since the first few days of homesickness after he got here. He tried to put a name on the feeling that put a lump in his throat and made him sob silently, however much he tried to hold it down. He bit down on his hand to stop the feeling, to replace it with pain. It didn't help. He would never see Ender again. Once he named the feeling, he could control it. He lay back and forced himself to go through the relaxing routine until he didn't feel like crying anymore. Then he drifted off to sleep. His hand was near his mouth. It lay on his pillow, hesitantly, as if Bean couldn't decide whether to bite his nails or suck on his fingertips. His forehead was creased and furrowed. His breathing was quick and light. He was a soldier, and if anyone had asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, he wouldn't have known what they meant.
When he was crossing into the shuttle, Ender noticed for the first time that the insignia on Major Anderson's uniform had changed. Yes, he's a colonel now, said Graff. In fact, Major Anderson has been placed in command of the battle school as of this afternoon. I have been reassigned to other duties. Ender did not ask him what they were. Graff strapped himself into a seat across the aisle from him. There was only one other passenger, a quiet man in civilian clothes, who was introduced as General Pace. Pace was carrying a briefcase, but Graff carried no more luggage than Ender did. Somehow that was comforting to Ender, that Graff also came away empty. Ender spoke only once on the voyage home. Why are we going home? He asked. I thought command school was in the asteroids somewhere. It is, said Graff. But the battle school has no facilities for docking long-range ships, so you get a short landside leave. Ender wanted to ask if that meant he could see his family. But suddenly, at the thought that it might be possible, he was afraid, and so he didn't ask. Just closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Behind him, General Pace was studying him. For what purpose, Ender could not guess. It was a hot summer afternoon in Florida when they landed. Ender had been so long without sunlight that the light nearly blinded him. He squinted and sneezed and wanted to get back indoors. Everything was far away and flat. The ground, lacking the upward curve of battle school floors, seemed instead to fall away, so that on level ground Ender felt as though he were on a pinnacle. The pull of real gravity felt different, and he scuffed his feet when he walked. He hated it. He wanted to go back home, back to the battle school, the only place in the universe where he belonged.
Arrested?
Well, it's a natural thought. General Pace is the head of the military police. There was a death in the battle school.
They didn't tell me whether Colonel Graff was being promoted or court-martialed. Just transferred with orders to report to the Polemark.
Is that a good sign or bad?
Who knows? On the one hand, Ender Wiggin not only survived, he passed a threshold. He graduated in dazzlingly good shape. You have to give old Graff credit for that. On the other hand, there's the fourth passenger on the shuttle, the one traveling in a bag.
Only the second death in the history of the school. At least it wasn't a suicide this time.
How is murder better, Major Imbu?
It wasn't murder, Colonel. We have it on video from 2 angles. No one can blame Ender.
But they might blame Graff. After all this is over, the civilians can rake over our files and decide what was right and what was not. Give us medals where they think we were right, take away our pensions and put us in jail where they decide we were wrong. At least they had the good sense not to tell Ender that the boy died.
It's the second time, too.
They didn't tell him about Stilson either.
The kid is scary.
Ender Wiggin isn't a killer. He just wins, thoroughly. If anybody's going to be scared, let it be the buggers.
Makes you almost feel sorry for them, knowing Ender's going to be coming after them.
The only one I feel sorry for is Ender. But not sorry enough to suggest they ought to let up on him. I just got access to the material that Graff's been getting all this time, about fleet movements, that sort of thing. I used to sleep easy at night.
Time's getting short?
I shouldn't have mentioned it. I can't tell you secured information.
I know.
Let's leave it at this. They didn't get him to command school a day too soon, and maybe a couple of years too late.
Children?
Brother and sister. They'd layered themselves 5 times through the nets, writing for companies that paid for their memberships. That sort of thing. Devil of a time tracking them down.
What are they hiding?
Could be anything. The most obvious thing to hide, though, is their ages. The boy is 15, the girl is 12.
Which one is Demosthenes?
The girl, the 12-year-old.
Pardon me, wait a minute. I don't really think it's funny, but I can't help but laugh. All this time we've been worried, all the time we've been trying to persuade the Russians not to take Demosthenes too seriously, we held up Locke as proof that Americans weren't all crazy warmongers. Brother and sister, pubescent.
And the last name is Wiggin.
Coincidence?
The Wiggin is a third. They are 1 and 2.
Oh, excellent. The Russians will never believe
that Demosthenes and Locke aren't as much under our control as the Wiggin.
Is there a conspiracy? Is someone controlling them?
We have been able to detect no contact between these 2 children and any adult who might be directing them.
So that is not to say that someone might not have invented some method you can't detect. It's hard to believe that 2 children...
I interviewed Colonel Graff when he arrived from the battle school. It is his best judgment that nothing these children have done is out of their reach. Their abilities are virtually identical with the Wiggin. Only their temperaments are different. What surprised him, however, was the orientation of the 2 personas. Demosthenes is definitely the girl, but Graff says the girl was rejected for battle school because she was too pacific, too conciliatory, and above all, too empathic.
Definitely not Demosthenes.
And the boy has the soul of a jackal.
Wasn't it Locke that was recently praised as the only truly open mind in America?
It's hard to know what's really happening. But Graff recommended, and I agree, that we should leave them alone, not expose them. Make no reports at this time except that we have determined that Locke and Demosthenes have no foreign connections, and have no connections with any domestic group either, except those publicly declared on the nets.
In other words, give them a clean bill of health.
I know Demosthenes seems dangerous, in part because he, or she, has such a wide following. But I think it's significant that the one of the 2 of them who is most ambitious has chosen the moderate, wise persona. And they're still just talking. They have influence, but no power.
In my experience, influence is power.
If we ever find them getting out of line, we can easily expose them.
Oh, only in the next few years. The longer we wait, the older they get, and the less shocking it is to discover who they are.
You know what the Russian troop movements have been. There's always the chance that Demosthenes is right, in which case...
We better have Demosthenes around. All right, we'll show them clean for now, but watch them. And I, of course, have to find ways of keeping the Russians calm.
In spite of all her misgivings, Valentine was having fun being Demosthenes. Her column was now being carried on practically every news net in the country, and it was fun to watch the money pile up in her attorney's accounts. Every now and then she and Peter would, in Demosthenes' name, donate a carefully calculated sum to a particular candidate or cause. Enough money that the donation would be noticed, but not so much that the candidate would feel she was trying to buy a vote. She was getting so many letters now that her Newsnet had hired a secretary to answer certain classes of routine correspondence for her. The fun letters from national and international leaders, sometimes hostile, sometimes friendly, always diplomatically trying to pry into Demosthenes' mind, those she and Peter read together, laughing in delight sometimes that people like this were writing to children and didn't know it. Sometimes, though, she was ashamed. Father was reading Demosthenes regularly. He never read Locke, or if he did, he said nothing about it. At dinner, though, he would often regale them with some telling point Demosthenes had made in that day's column. Peter loved it when Father did that. See, it shows that the common man is paying attention. But it made Valentine feel humiliated for Father. If he ever found out that all this time I was writing the columns he told us about, and that I didn't even believe half the things I wrote, he would be angry and ashamed. At school, she once nearly got them in trouble when her history teacher assigned the class to write a paper contrasting the views of Demosthenes and Locke as expressed in 2 of their early columns. Valentine was careless and did a brilliant job of analysis. As a result, she had to work hard to talk the principal out of having her essay published on the very Newsnet that carried Demosthenes' column. Peter was savage about it. You write too much like Demosthenes. You can't get published. I should kill Demosthenes now. You're getting out of control. If he raged about that blunder, Peter frightened her still more when he went silent. It happened when Demosthenes was invited to take part in the President's Council on Education for the Future, a blue-ribbon panel that was designed to do nothing but do it splendidly. Valentine thought Peter would take it as a triumph, but he did not. Turn it down, he said. Why should I? She asked. It's no work at all, and they even said that because of Demosthenes' well-known desire for privacy, they would net all the meetings. It makes Demosthenes into a respectable person, and you love it that you got it before I did. Peter, it isn't you and me. It's Demosthenes and Locke. We made them up. They aren't real. Besides, this appointment doesn't mean they like Demosthenes better than Locke. It just means that Demosthenes has a much stronger base of support. You knew he would. Appointing him pleases a large number of Russian haters and chauvinists. It wasn't supposed to work this way. Locke was supposed to be the respected one. He is. Real respect takes longer than official respect. Peter, don't be angry at me because I've done well with the things you told me to do. But he was angry, for days. And ever since, he had left her to think through all her own columns, instead of telling her what to write. He probably assumed that this would make the quality of Demosthenes' columns deteriorate. But if it did, no one noticed. Perhaps it made him even angrier that she never came to him weeping for help. She had been Demosthenes too long now to need anyone to tell her what Demosthenes would think about things. And as her correspondence with other politically active citizens grew, she began to learn things. information that simply wasn't available to the general public. Certain military people who corresponded with her dropped hints about things without meaning to, and she and Peter put them together to build up a fascinating and frightening picture of Warsaw Pact activity. They were indeed preparing for war, a vicious and bloody earthbound war. Demosthenes wasn't wrong to suspect that the Second Warsaw Pact was not abiding by the terms of the League. And the character of Demosthenes gradually took on a life of his own. At times she found herself thinking like Demosthenes at the end of a writing session, agreeing with ideas that were supposed to be calculated poses. And sometimes she read Peter's Locke essays and found herself annoyed at his obvious blindness to what was really going on. Perhaps it's impossible to wear an identity without becoming what you pretend to be. She thought of that, worried about it for a few days, and then wrote a column using that as a premise, to show that politicians who toadied to the Russians in order to keep the peace would inevitably end up subservient to them in everything. It was a lovely bite at the party in power, and she got a lot of good mail about it. She also stopped being frightened of the idea of becoming, to a degree, Demosthenes. He's smarter than Peter and I ever gave him credit for, she thought. Graf was waiting for her after school. He stood leaning on his car. He was in civilian clothes, and he had gained weight, so she didn't recognize him at first, but he beckoned to her, and before he could introduce himself, she remembered his name. "I won't write another letter," she said. "I never should have written that one." "You don't like medals, then, I guess." "Not much." "Come for a ride with me, Valentine." "I don't ride with strangers." He handed her a paper. It was a release form, and her parents had signed it. "I guess you're not a stranger. Where are we going?" "To see a young soldier who was in Greensboro, on leave." She got in the car. "Ender's only 10 years old," she said. "I thought you told me last time he'd be eligible for leave when he was 16. "He skipped a few grades." "So he's doing well?" "Ask him when you see him." "Why me? Why not the whole family?" Graf sighed. "Ender sees the world his own way. We had to persuade him to see you. As for Peter and your parents, he was not interested. Life at the battle school was intense." "What do you mean? He's gone crazy?" "Oh, on the contrary. He's the sanest person I know. He's sane enough to know that his parents are not particularly eager to reopen a book of affection that was closed quite tightly 4 years ago. As for Peter, we didn't even suggest a meeting, and so he didn't have a chance to tell us to go to hell." They went out Lake Brant Road and turned off just past the lake, following a road that wound down and up until they came to a white clapboard mansion that sprawled along the top of a hill. It looked over Lake Brant on one side and a 5-acre private lake on the other. "This is the house that Medley's Mist E. Rubb built," said Graf. "The IF picked it up in a tax sale about 20 years ago. Ender insisted that his conversation with you should not be bugged. I promised him it wouldn't be, and to help inspire confidence, the two of you are going out on a raft he built himself. I should warn you, though. I intend to ask you questions about your conversation when it is finished. You don't have to answer, but I hope you will." "I didn't bring a swimming suit." "We can provide one." "One that isn't bugged?" "At some point, there must be trust. For instance, I know who Demosthenes really is." She felt a thrill of fear run through her, but said nothing. "I've known since I landed from the battle school. There are perhaps 6 of us in the world who know his identity, not counting the Russians. God only knows what they know. But Demosthenes has nothing to fear from us. Demosthenes can trust our discretion. Just as I trust Demosthenes not to tell Locke what's going on here today. Mutual trust. We tell each other things. Valentine couldn't decide whether it was Demosthenes they approved of or Valentine Wiggin. If the former, she would not trust them. If the latter, then perhaps she could. The fact that they did not want her to discuss this with Peter suggested that perhaps they knew the difference between them. She did not stop to wonder whether she herself knew the difference anymore. You said he built the raft. How long has he been here? 2 months. We meant his leave to last only a few days, but you see, he doesn't seem interested in going on with his education. Oh, so I'm therapy again. This time we can't censor your letter. We're just taking our chances. We need your brother badly. Humanity is on the cusp. This time Val had grown up enough to know just how much danger the world was in, and she had been Demosthenes long enough that she didn't hesitate to do her duty. Where is he? Down at the boat slip. Where's the swimming suit? Ender didn't wave when she walked down the hill toward him, didn't smile when she stepped onto the floating boat slip. But she knew that he was glad to see her, knew it because of the way his eyes never left her face. You're bigger than I remembered, she said stupidly. You too, he said. I also remembered that you were beautiful. Memory does play tricks on us. No, your face is the same, but I don't remember what beautiful means anymore. Come on, let's go out into the lake. She looked at the small raft with misgivings. Don't stand up on it, that's all, he said. He got on by crawling, spider-like, on toes and fingers. It's the first thing I built with my own hands since you and I used to build with blocks. Peter-proof buildings. She laughed. They used to take pleasure in building things that would stand up, even when a lot of the obvious supports had been removed. Peter, in turn, liked to remove a block here or there, so the structure would be fragile enough that the next person to touch it would knock it down. Peter was an ass, but he did provide some focus to their childhood. Peter's changed, she said. Let's not talk about him, said Ender. All right. She crawled onto the boat, not as deftly as Ender. He used a paddle to maneuver them slowly toward the center of the private lake. She noticed aloud that he was sun-browned and strong. The strong part comes from battle school. The sun-browning comes from this lake. I spend a lot of time on the water. When I'm swimming, it's like being weightless. I miss being weightless. Also, when I'm here on the lake, the land slopes up in every direction, like living in a bowl. I've lived in a bowl for 4 years. So we're strangers now, aren't we, Valentine? No, she said. She reached out and touched his leg. Then suddenly, she squeezed his knee, right where he had always been most ticklish. But almost at the same moment, he caught her wrist in his hand. His grip was very strong, even though his hands were smaller than hers, and his own arms were slender and tight. For a moment he looked dangerous, and then he relaxed. Oh, yes, he said. You used to tickle me. Not anymore, she said, taking back her hand. Want to swim?" In answer, she dropped herself over the side of the raft. The water was clear and clean, and there was no chlorine in it. She swam for a while, then returned to the raft and lay on it in the hazy sunlight. A wasp circled her, then landed on the raft beside her head. She knew it was there and ordinarily would have been afraid of it, but not today. Let it walk on this raft. Let it bake in the sun as I'm doing. Then the raft rocked, and she turned to see Ender calmly crushing the life out of the wasp with one finger. "These are a nasty breed," Ender said. "They sting you without waiting to be insulted first." He smiled. "I've been learning about preemptive strategies. I'm very good. No one ever beat me. I'm the best soldier they ever had." "Who would expect less?" she said. "You're a Wiggin." "Whatever that means," he said. "It means that you are going to make a difference in the world." And she told him what she and Peter were doing. "How old is Peter? 14? Already planning to take over the world?" "He thinks he's Alexander the Great. And why shouldn't he be? Why shouldn't you be, too? We can't both be Alexander." "Two faces of the same coin. And I am the metal in between." Even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. She had shared so much with Peter these last few years that even when she thought she despised him, she understood him. While Ender had been only a memory till now, a very small, fragile boy who needed her protection. Not this cold-eyed, dark-skinned manling who kills wasps with his fingers. Maybe he and Peter and I are all the same, and have been all along. Maybe we only thought we were different from each other, out of jealousy. The trouble with coins is, when one face is up, the other face is down. And right now you think you're down. They want me to encourage you to go on with your studies. They aren't studies, they're games. All games from beginning to end, only they change the rules whenever they feel like it. He held up a limp hand. "See the strings? But you can use them, too. Only if they want to be used, only if they think they're using you. No, it's too hard. I don't want to play anymore. Just when I start to be happy, just when I think I can handle things, they stick in another knife. I keep having nightmares now that I'm here. I dream I'm in the battle room, only instead of being weightless, they're playing games with gravity. They keep changing its direction, so I never end up on the wall I launched for. I never end up where I meant to go. And I keep pleading with them just to let me get to the door. And they won't let me out. They keep sucking me back in." She heard the anger in his voice and assumed it was directed at her. "I suppose that's what I'm here for, to suck you back in. I didn't want to see you. They told me. I was afraid that I'd still love you. I hoped that you would." "My fear, your wish, both granted." "Ender, it really is true. We may be young, but we're not powerless. We play by their rules long enough, and it becomes our game." She giggled. "I'm on a presidential commission. Peter is so angry." "They don't let me use the nets. There isn't a computer in the place, except the household machines that run the security system and the lighting. Ancient things installed back a century ago, when they made computers that didn't hook up with anything. They took away my army, they took away my desk, and you know something? I don't really mind." "You must be good company for yourself." Not me. My memories. Maybe that's who you are. What you remember. No. My memories of strangers. My memories of the buggers. Valentine shivered, as if a cold breeze had suddenly passed. I refuse to watch the bugger vids anymore. They're always the same. I used to study them for hours, the way their ships move through space. And something funny that only occurred to me lying out here on the lake. I realized that all the battles in which buggers and humans fought hand to hand, all those are from the first invasion. All the scenes from the second invasion, when our soldiers are in IF uniforms, in those scenes, the buggers are always already dead, lying there, slumped over the controls, not a sign of struggle or anything. And Mazer Rackham's battle, well, they never show us any footage from that battle. Maybe it's a secret weapon. No, I don't care about how we killed them. It's the buggers themselves. I don't know anything about them, and yet someday I'm supposed to fight them. I've been through a lot of fights in my life, sometimes games, sometimes not games. Every time I've won because I could understand the way my enemy thought. From what they did. I could tell what they thought I was doing, how they wanted the battle to take shape. And I played off of that. I'm very good at that, understanding how other people think. The curse of the Wiggin children. She joked, but it frightened her, that Ender might understand her as completely as he did his enemies. Peter always understood her, or at least thought he did, but he was such a moral sinkhole that she never had to feel embarrassed when he guessed even her worst thoughts. But Ender, she did not want him to understand her. It would make her naked before him. She would be ashamed. You don't think you can beat the buggers unless you know them. It goes deeper than that. Being here alone with nothing to do, I've been thinking about myself, too, trying to understand why I hate myself so badly. No, Ender. Don't tell me no, Ender. It took me a long time to realize that I did, but believe me, I did. Do. And it came down to this. In the moment when I truly understand my enemy, understand him well enough to defeat him, then in that very moment, I also love him. I think it's impossible to really understand somebody, what they want, what they believe, and not love them the way they love themselves. And then in that very moment, when I love them, you beat them. For a moment she was not afraid of his understanding. No, you don't understand. I destroy them. I make it impossible for them to ever hurt me again. I grind them until they don't exist. Of course you don't. And now the fear came again, worse than before. Peter has mellowed, but they've made you into a killer. Two sides of the same coin, but which side is which? I've really hurt some people, Val. I'm not making this up. I know, Ender. How will you hurt me? See what I'm becoming, Val, he said softly. Even you are afraid of me. And he touched her cheek so gently that she wanted to cry, like the touch of his soft, baby hand when he was still an infant. She remembered that, the touch of his soft and innocent hand on her cheek. I'm not, she said, and in that moment it was true. You should be. No, I shouldn't. You're going to shrivel up if you stay in the water. Also, the sharks might get you. He smiled. The sharks learned to leave me alone a long time ago. But he pulled himself onto the raft, bringing a wash of water across it as it tipped. It was cold on Valentine's back. Ender, Peter's going to do it. He's smart enough to take the time it takes, but he's going to win his way into power, if not right now, then later. I'm not sure yet whether that'll be a good thing or a bad thing. Peter can be cruel, but he knows the getting and keeping of power. And there are signs that once the Bugger War is over, and maybe even before it ends, the world will collapse into chaos again. The Russian Empire was on its way to hegemony before the first invasion. If they try for it afterward, so even Peter might be a better alternative. You've been discovering some of the destroyer in yourself, Ender. Well, so have I. Peter didn't have a monopoly on that, whatever the testers thought. And Peter has some of the builder in him. He isn't kind, but he doesn't break every good thing he sees anymore. Once you realize that power will always end up with the sort of people who crave it, I think that there are worse people who could have it than Peter. With that strong a recommendation, I could vote for him myself. Sometimes it seems absolutely silly. A 14-year-old boy and his kid sister plotting to take over the world. She tried to laugh. It wasn't funny. We aren't just ordinary children, are we? None of us. Don't you sometimes wish we were? She tried to imagine herself being like the other girls at school, tried to imagine life if she didn't feel responsible for the future of the world. It would be so dull. I don't think so. And he stretched out on the raft, as if he could lie on the water forever. It was true. Whatever they did to Ender in the battle school, they had spent his ambition. He really did not want to leave the sun-warmed waters of this bowl. No, she realized. No, he believes that he doesn't want to leave here, but there is still too much of Peter in him. Or too much of me. None of us could be happy for long doing nothing. Or perhaps it's just that none of us could be happy living with no other company than ourself. So she began to prod again. What is the one name that everyone in the world knows? Mazer Rackham. And what if you win the next war, the way Mazer did? Mazer Rackham was a fluke. A reserve. Nobody believed in him. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But suppose you do it. Suppose you beat the buggers, and your name is known the way Mazer Rackham's name is known. Let somebody else be famous. Peter wants to be famous. Let him save the world. I'm not talking about fame, Ender. I'm not talking about power, either. I'm talking about accidents. Just like the accident that Mazer Rackham happened to be the one who was there when somebody had to stop the buggers. If I'm here, said Ender, then I won't be there. Somebody else will. Let them have the accident. His tone of weary unconcern infuriated her. I'm talking about my life, you self-centered little bastard. If her words bothered him, he didn't show it. Just lay there, eyes closed. When you were little and Peter tortured you, it's a good thing I didn't lie back and wait for Mom and Dad to save you. They never understood how dangerous Peter was. I knew you had the monitor, but I didn't wait for them either. Do you know what Peter used to do to me because I stopped him from hurting you? Shut up, Ender whispered. Because she saw that his chest was trembling, because she knew that she had indeed hurt him, because she knew that just like Peter, she had found his weakest place and stabbed him there. She fell silent. "I can't beat them," Ender said softly. "I'll be out there like Mazer Rackham one day, and everybody will be depending on me. And I won't be able to do it. If you can't, Ender, then nobody could. If you can't beat them, then they deserve to win because they're stronger and better than us. It won't be your fault. Tell it to the dead. If not you, then who? Anybody. Nobody, Ender. I'll tell you something. If you try and lose, then it isn't your fault. But if you don't try and we lose, then it's all your fault. You killed us all. I'm a killer no matter what. What else should you be? Human beings didn't evolve brains in order to lie around on lakes. Killing's the first thing we learned. And a good thing we did, or we'd be dead, and the tigers would own the earth. I could never beat Peter. No matter what I said or did, I never could. So it came back to Peter. He was years older than you and stronger. So are the buggers. She could see his reasoning, or rather, his unreasoning. He could win all he wanted, but he knew in his heart that there was always someone who could destroy him. He always knew that he had not really won because there was Peter, undefeated champion. "You want to beat Peter?" she asked. "No," he answered. "Beat the buggers. Then come home and see who notices Peter Wiggin anymore. Look him in the eye when all the world loves and reveres you. That'll be defeat in his eyes, Ender. That's how you win." "You don't understand," he said. "Yes, I do." "No, you don't. I don't want to beat Peter." "Then what do you want?" "I want him to love me." She had no answer. As far as she knew, Peter didn't love anybody. Ender said nothing more, just lay there and lay there. Finally, Valentine, the sweat dripping off her, the mosquitoes beginning to hover as the dusk came on, took one final dip in the water and then began to push the raft in to shore. Ender showed no sign that he knew what she was doing, but his irregular breathing told her that he was not asleep. When they got to the shore, she climbed onto the dock and said, "I love you, Ender, more than ever, no matter what you decide." He didn't answer. She doubted that he believed her. She walked back up the hill, savagely angry at them for making her come to Ender like this. For she had, after all, done just what they wanted. She had talked Ender into going back into his training, and he wouldn't soon forgive her for that.
Ender came in the door, still wet from his last dip in the lake. It was dark outside, and dark in the room where Graf waited for him. "Are we going now?" asked Ender. "If you want to," Graf said. "When?" "When you're ready." Ender showered and dressed. He was finally used to the way civilian clothes fit together, but he still didn't feel right without a uniform or a flash suit. "I'll never wear a flash suit again," he thought. "That was the battle school game, and I'm through with that." He heard the crickets chirping madly in the woods. In the near distance he heard the crackling sound of a car driving slowly on gravel. What else should he take with him? He had read several of the books in the library, but they belonged to the house and he couldn't take them. The only thing he owned was the raft he had made with his own hands. That would stay here, too. The lights were on now in the room where Graf waited. He, too, had changed clothing. He was back in uniform. They sat in the back seat of the car together, driving along country roads to come at the airport from the back. Back when the population was growing, said Graff, they kept this area in woods and farms, watershed land. The rainfall here starts a lot of rivers flowing, a lot of underground water moving around. The earth is deep, and right to the heart it's alive, Ender. We people only live on the top like the bugs that live on the scum of the still water near the shore. Ender said nothing. We train our commandos the way we do because that's what it takes. They have to think in certain ways. They can't be distracted by a lot of things, so we isolate them. You keep you separate, and it works. But it's so easy when you never meet people, when you never know the earth itself, when you live with metal walls keeping out the cold of space. It's easy to forget why earth is worth saving, why the world of people might be worth the price you pay. So that's why you brought me here, thought Ender. With all your hurry, that's why you took 3 months to make me love earth. Well, it worked. All your tricks worked. Valentine, too, she was another one of your tricks, to make me remember that I'm not going to school for myself. Well, I remember. I may have used Valentine, said Graff, and you may hate me for it, Ender, but keep this in mind. It only works because what's between you, that's real, that's what matters. Billions of those connections between human beings. That's what you're fighting to keep alive. Ender turned his face to the window and watched the helicopters and dirigibles rise and fall. They took a helicopter to the IF spaceport at Stumpy Point. It was officially named for a dead hegemon, but everybody called it Stumpy Point, after the pitiful little town that had been paved over when they made the approaches to the vast islands of steel and concrete that dotted Pamlico Sound. There were still water birds taking their fastidious little steps in the salt water, where mossy trees dipped down as if to drink. It began to rain lightly, and the concrete was black and slick. It was hard to tell where it left off and the sound began. Graff led him through a maze of clearances. Authority was a little plastic ball that Graff carried. He dropped it into chutes, and doors opened, and people stood up and saluted, and the chutes spat out the ball, and Graff went on. Ender noticed that, at first, everyone watched Graff, but as they penetrated deeper into the spaceport, people began watching Ender. At first, it was the man of real authority, they noticed, but later, where everyone had authority, it was his cargo they cared to see. Only when Graff strapped himself into the shuttle seat beside him did Ender realize Graff was going to launch with him. "How far?" asked Ender. "How far are you going with me?" Graff smiled thinly. "All the way, Ender." "Are they making you administrator of command school?" "No." So they had removed Graff from his post at battle school solely to accompany Ender to his next assignment. How important am I, he wondered. And like a whisper of Peter's voice inside his mind, he heard the question, how can I use this? He shuddered and tried to think of something else. Peter could have fantasies about ruling the world, but Ender didn't have them. Still thinking back on his life in battle school, it occurred to him that although he had never sought power, he had always had it. But he decided that it was a power born of excellence, not manipulation. He had no reason to be ashamed of it. He had never, except perhaps with Bean, used his power to hurt someone. And with Bean, things had worked well after all. Bean had become a friend, finally, to take the place of the lost ally, who in turn took the place of Valentine. Valentine, who was helping Peter in his plotting. Valentine, who still loved Ender no matter what happened. And following that train of thought led him back to Earth, back to the quiet hours in the center of the clear water, ringed by a bowl of tree-covered hills. That is the Earth, he thought. Not a globe thousands of kilometers around, but a forest with a shining lake, a house hidden at the crest of the hill, high in the trees, a grassy slope leading upward from the water, fish leaping and birds strafing to take the bugs that lived at the border between water and sky. Earth was the constant noise of crickets and winds and birds, and the voice of one girl who spoke to him out of his far-off childhood. The same voice that had once protected him from terror, the same voice that he would do anything to keep alive, even return to school, even leave Earth behind again for another 4 or 40 or 4,000 years. Even if she loved Peter more. His eyes were closed, and he had not made any sound but breathing. Still, Graf reached out and touched his hand across the aisle. Ender stiffened in surprise, and Graf soon withdrew. But for a moment Ender was struck with the startling thought that perhaps Graf felt some affection for him. But no, it was just another calculated gesture. Graf was creating a commander out of a little boy. No doubt Unit 17 in the course of studies included an affectionate gesture from the teacher. The shuttle reached the IPL satellite in only a few hours. Interplanetary Launch was a city of 3,000 inhabitants breathing oxygen from the plants that also fed them, drinking water that had already passed through their bodies 10,000 times, living only to service the tugs that did all the ox work in the solar system and the shuttles that took their cargoes and passengers back to the Earth or the Moon. It was a world where, briefly, Ender felt at home, since its floors sloped upward as they did in the battle school. Their tug was fairly new. The IF was constantly casting off its old vehicles and purchasing the latest models. It had just brought a vast load of drawn steel processed by a factory ship that was taking apart minor planets in the asteroid belt. The steel would be dropped to the Moon, and now the tug was linked to 14 barges. Graf dropped his ball into the reader again, however, and the barges were uncoupled from the tug. It would be making a fast run this time, to a destination of Graf's specification, not to be stated until the tug had cut loose from IPL. "It's no great secret," said the tug's captain. "Whenever the destination is unknown, it's for ISL. By analogy with IPL, Ender decided the letters meant interstellar launch." "This time it isn't," said Graf. "Where, then?" "IF Command." "I don't have security clearance even to know where that is, sir." "Your ship knows," said Graf. "Just let the computer have a look at this and follow the course it plots." He handed the captain the plastic ball. "And I'm supposed to close my eyes during the whole voyage so I don't figure out where we are?" "Oh, no, of course not. IF Command is on the minor planet Eros, which should be about 3 months away from here at the highest possible speed, which is the speed you'll use, of course." "Eros? But I thought that the buggers burned that to a radioactive... When did I receive security clearance to know this?" "You didn't. So when we arrive at Eros, you will undoubtedly be assigned to permanent duty there." The captain understood immediately and didn't like it. "I'm a pilot, you son of a bitch, and you got no right to lock me up on a rock." "I will overlook your derisive language to a superior officer. I do apologize, but my orders were to take the fastest available military tug. At the moment I arrived, that was you. It isn't as though anyone were out to get you. Cheer up. The war may be over in another 15 years, and then the location of IF Command won't have to be a secret anymore. By the way, you should be aware, in case you're one of those who relies on visuals for docking, that Eros has been blacked out. Its albedo is only slightly brighter than a black hole. You won't see it." "Thanks," said the captain. It was nearly a month into the voyage before he managed to speak civilly to Colonel Graf. The shipboard computer had a limited library. It was geared primarily to entertainment rather than education. So during the voyage, after breakfast and morning exercises, Ender and Graf would usually talk about command school, about Earth, about astronomy and physics, and whatever Ender wanted to know. And above all, he wanted to know about the buggers. "We don't know much," said Graf. "We've never had a live one in custody. Even when we caught one unarmed and alive, he died the moment it became obvious he was captured. Even the he is uncertain. The most likely thing, in fact, is that most bugger soldiers are females, but with atrophied or vestigial sexual organs. We can't tell. It's their psychology that would be most useful to you, and we haven't exactly had a chance to interview them." Tell me what you know, and maybe I'll learn something that I need. So Graf told him. The buggers were organisms that could conceivably have evolved on Earth if things had gone a different way 1 billion years ago. At the molecular level, there were no surprises. Even the genetic material was the same. It was no accident that they looked insect-like to human beings, though their internal organs were now much more complex and specialized than any insects, and they had evolved an internal skeleton and shed most of the exoskeleton. Their physical structure still echoed their ancestors, who could easily have been very much like Earth's ants. But don't be fooled by that, said Graf. It's just as meaningful to say that our ancestors could easily have been very much like squirrels. If that's all we have to go on, that's something, said Ender. Squirrels never built starships, said Graf. There are usually a few changes on the way from gathering nuts and seeds to harvesting asteroids and putting permanent research stations on the moons of Saturn. The buggers could probably see about the same spectrum of light as human beings, and there was artificial lighting in their ships and ground installations. However, their antennae seemed almost vestigial. There was no evidence from their bodies that smelling, tasting, or hearing were particularly important to them. Of course, we can't be sure, but we can't see any way that they could have used sound for communication. The oddest thing of all was that they also don't have any communication devices on their ships, no radios, nothing that could ever transmit or receive any kind of signal. They communicate ship to ship. I've seen the videos. They talk to each other. True. But body to body, mind to mind. It's the most important thing we learned from them. Their communication, however they do it, is instantaneous. Light speed is no barrier. When Mazer Rackham defeated their invasion fleet, they all closed up shop at once. There was no time for a signal. Everything just stopped. Ender remembered the videos of uninjured buggers lying dead at their posts. We knew then that it was possible to communicate faster than light. That was 70 years ago. And once we knew what could be done, we did it. Not me, mind you, I wasn't born then. How is it possible? I can't explain philodic physics to you. Half of it nobody understands anyway. What matters is we built the Ansible. The official name is Philodic Parallax Instantaneous Communicator, but somebody dredged the name Ansible out of an old book somewhere and it caught on. Not that most people even know the machine exists. That means that ships could talk to each other even when they're across the solar system, said Ender. It means, said Graf, that ships could talk to each other even when they're across the galaxy. And the buggers can do it without machines. So they knew about their defeat the moment it happened, said Ender. I always figured, everybody always said that they probably only found out that they lost the battle 25 years ago. It keeps people from panicking, said Graf. I'm telling you things you can't know, by the way, if you're ever going to leave IF Command before the war's over. Ender was angry. If you know me at all, you know I can keep a secret. It's a regulation. People under 25 are assumed to be a security risk. It's very unjust to a good many responsible children, but it helps narrow the number of people who might let something slip. What's all the secrecy for, anyway? Because we've taken some terrible risks, Ender, and we don't want to have every net on Earth second-guessing those decisions. You see, as soon as we had a working Ansible, we tucked it into our best starships and launched them to attack the buggers' home systems. Do we know where they are? Yes. So we're not waiting for the third invasion. We are the third invasion. We're attacking them. Nobody says that. Everybody thinks we have a huge fleet of warships waiting in the Comet Shield. Not one. We're quite defenseless there. What if they've sent a fleet to attack us? Then we're dead. But our ships haven't seen such a fleet, not a sign of one. Maybe they gave up and they're planning to leave us alone. Maybe. You've seen the videos. Would you bet the human race on the chance of them giving up and leaving us alone? Ender tried to grasp the amounts of time that had gone by. And the ships have been traveling for 70 years, some of them, and some for 30 years, and some for 20. We make better ships now. We're learning how to play with space a little better. But every starship that is not still under construction is on its way to a bugger world or outpost. Every starship with cruisers and fighters tucked into its belly is out there approaching the buggers, decelerating, because they're almost there. The first ships we sent to the most distant objectives, the more recent ships to the closer ones. Our timing was pretty good. They'll all be arriving in combat range within a few months of each other. Unfortunately, our most primitive, outdated equipment will be attacking their home world. Still, they're armed well enough, so we have some weapons the buggers never saw before. When will they arrive? Within the next 5 years, Ender. Everything is ready at IF Command. The Master Ansible is there, in contact with all our invasion fleet. The ships are all working, ready to fight. All we lack, Ender, is the battle commander, someone who knows what the hell to do with those ships when they get there. And what if no one knows what to do with them? We'll just do our best, with the best commander we can get. Me, thought Ender. They want me to be ready in 5 years. Colonel Graff, there isn't a chance I'll be ready to command a fleet in time. Graff shrugged. So, do your best. If you aren't ready, we'll make do with what we've got. That eased Ender's mind, but only for a moment. Of course, Ender, what we've got right now is nobody. Ender knew that this was another of Graff's games. Make me believe that it all depends on me, so I can't slack off, so I push myself as hard as possible. Game or not, though, it might also be true, and so he would work as hard as possible. It was what Val had wanted of him. 5 years. Only 5 years until the fleet arrives, and I don't know anything yet. I'll only be 15 in 5 years, Ender said. Going on 16, said Graff. It all depends on what you know. Colonel Graff, he said, I just want to go back and swim in the lake. After we win the war, said Graff, or lose it, we'll have a few decades before they get back here to finish us off. The house will be there, and I promise you can swim to your heart's content. But I'll still be too young for security clearance. Oh, we'll keep you under armed guard at all times. The military knows how to handle these things. They both laughed. And Ender had to remind himself that Graff was only acting like a friend, that everything he did was a lie or a cheat calculated to turn Ender into an efficient fighting machine. I'll become exactly the tool you want me to be, said Ender silently, but at least I won't be fooled into it. I'll do it because I choose to, not because you tricked me, you sly bastard. The tug reached Eros before they could see it. The captain showed them the visual scan, then superimposed the heat scan on the same screen. They were practically on top of it, only 4,000 kilometers out, but Eros, only 24 kilometers long, was invisible if it didn't shine with reflected sunlight. The captain docked the ship on one of the 3 landing platforms that circled Eros. It could not land directly because Eros had enhanced gravity, and the tug, designed for towing cargoes, could never escape the gravity well. He bade them an irritable goodbye, but Ender and Graff remained cheerful. The captain was bitter at having to leave his tug. Ender and Graff felt like prisoners finally paroled from jail. When they boarded the shuttle that would take them to the surface of Eros, they repeated perverse misquotations of lines from the videos that the captain had endlessly watched and laughed like madmen. The captain grew surly and withdrew by pretending to go to sleep. Then, almost as an afterthought, Ender asked Graff one last question. Why are we fighting the buggers? I've heard all kinds of reasons, said Graff. Because they have an overcrowded system and they've got to colonize. Because they can't stand the thought of other intelligent life in the universe. Because they don't think we are intelligent life. Because they have some weird religion. Because they watched our old video broadcasts and decided we were hopelessly violent. All kinds of reasons. What do you believe? It doesn't matter what I believe. I want to know anyway. They must talk to each other directly, Ender, mind to mind. What one thinks, another can also think. What one remembers, another can also remember. Why would they ever develop language? Why would they ever learn to read and write? How would they know what reading and writing were if they saw them, or signals, or numbers, or anything that we use to communicate? This isn't just a matter of translating from one language to another. They don't have a language at all. We used every means we could think of to communicate with them, but they don't even have the machinery to know we're signaling. And maybe they've been trying to think to us, and they can't understand why we don't respond. So the whole war is because we can't talk to each other? If the other fellow can't tell you his story, you can never be sure he isn't trying to kill you. What if we just left them alone? And, we didn't go to them first. They came to us. If they were going to leave us alone, they could have done it 100 years ago, before the first invasion. Maybe they didn't know we were intelligent life. Maybe, believe me, there's a century of discussion on this very subject. Nobody knows the answer. When it comes down to it, though, the real decision is inevitable. If one of us has to be destroyed, let's make damn sure we're the ones alive at the end. Our genes won't let us decide any other way. Nature can't evolve a species that hasn't a will to survive. Individuals might be bred to sacrifice themselves, but the race as a whole can never decide to cease to exist. So, if we can, we'll kill every last one of the buggers, and if they can, they'll kill every last one of us. As for me, said Ender, I'm in favor of surviving. I know, said Graf. That's why you're here.
Took your time, didn't you, Graf? The voyage isn't short, but the 3-month vacation seems excessive.
I prefer not to deliver damaged merchandise.
Some men simply have no sense of hurry. Oh well, it's only the fate of the world, never mind me. You must understand our anxiety. We're here with the Ansible, receiving constant reports of the progress of our starships. We have to face the coming war every day, if you can call them days. He's such a very little boy.
There's a greatness in him, a magnitude of spirit.
A killer instinct, too, I hope.
Yes.
We've planned out an impromptu course of study for him, all subject to your approval, of course.
I'll look at it. I don't pretend to know the subject matter, Admiral Shemraj Nagar. I'm only here because I know Ender. So don't be afraid that I'll try to second-guess the order of your presentation. Only the pace.
How much can we tell him?
Don't waste his time on the physics of interstellar travel.
What about the Ansible?
I already told him about that, and the fleets. I said they would arrive at their destination within 5 years.
It seems there's very little left for us to tell him.
You can tell him about the weapon systems. He has to know enough to make intelligent decisions.
We can be useful after all. How very kind. We've devoted one of the 5 simulators to his exclusive use.
What about the others?
The other simulators?
The other children.
You were brought here to take care of Ender Wiggin.
Just curious. Remember, they were all my students at one time or another.
And now they are all mine. They are entering into the mysteries of the fleet, Colonel Graf, to which you, as a soldier, have never been introduced.
You make it sound like a priesthood.
And a god, and a religion. Even those of us who command by Ansible know the majesty of flight among the stars. I can see you find my mysticism distasteful. I assure you that your distaste only reveals your ignorance. Soon enough, Ender Wiggin will also know what I know. He will dance the graceful ghost dance through the stars, and whatever greatness there is within him will be unlocked, revealed, set forth before the universe for all to see. You have the soul of a stone, Colonel Graf, but I sing to a stone as easily as to another singer. You may go to your quarters and establish yourself.
I have nothing to establish except the clothing I am wearing.
You own nothing?
They keep my salary in an account somewhere on Earth. I've never needed it, except to buy civilian clothes on my vacation.
A non-materialist, and yet you are unpleasantly fat. A gluttonous ascetic? Such a contradiction.
When I'm tense, I eat, whereas when you're tense, you spout solid waste.
I like you, Colonel Graf. I think we shall get along.
I don't much care, Admiral Shamraj-Nagar. I came here for Ender. And neither of us came here for you.
Ender hated Eros from the moment he shuttled down from the tug. He had been uncomfortable enough on Earth, where floors were flat. Eros was hopeless. It was a roughly spindle-shaped rock only 6.5 kilometers thick at its narrowest point. Since the surface of the planetoid was entirely devoted to absorbing sunlight and converting it to energy, everyone lived in the smooth-walled rooms linked by tunnels that laced the interior of the asteroid. The closed-in space was no problem for Ender. What bothered him was that all the tunnel floors noticeably sloped downward. From the start, Ender was plagued by vertigo as he walked through the tunnels, especially the ones that girdled Eros's narrow circumference. It did not help that gravity was only half of Earth normal. The illusion of being on the verge of falling was almost complete. There was also something disturbing about the proportions of the rooms. The ceilings were too low for the width, the tunnels too narrow. It was not a comfortable place. Worst of all, though, was the number of people. Ender had no important memories of the scale of the cities of Earth. His idea of a comfortable number of people was the battle school, where he had known by sight every person who dwelt there. Here, though, 10,000 people lived within the rock. There was no crowding, despite the amount of space devoted to life support and other machinery. What bothered Ender was that he was constantly surrounded by strangers. They never let him come to know anyone. He saw the other command school students often, but since he never attended any class regularly, they remained only faces. He would attend a lecture here or there, but usually he was tutored by one teacher after another, or occasionally helped to learn a process by another student, whom he met once and never saw again. He ate alone or with Colonel Graff. His recreation was in a gym, but he rarely saw the same people in it twice. He recognized that they were isolating him again, this time not by setting the other students to hating him, but rather by giving them no opportunity to become friends. He could hardly have been close to most of them anyway. Except for Ender, the other students were all well into adolescence. So Ender withdrew into his studies and learned quickly and well. Astrogation and military history he absorbed like water. Abstract mathematics was more difficult, but whenever he was given a problem that involved patterns in space and time, he found that his intuition was more reliable than his calculation. He often saw at once a solution that he could only prove after minutes or hours of manipulating numbers. And for pleasure, there was the simulator, the most perfect video game he had ever played. Teachers and students trained him step by step in its use. At first, not knowing the awesome power of the game, he had played only at the tactical level, controlling a single fighter in continuous maneuvers to find and destroy an enemy. The computer-controlled enemy was devious and powerful, and whenever Ender tried a tactic, he found the computer using it against him within minutes. The game was a holographic display, and his fighter was represented only by a tiny light. The enemy was another light of a different color, and they danced and spun and maneuvered through a cube of space that must have been 10 meters to his side. The controls were powerful. He could rotate the display in any direction, so he could watch from any angle, and he could move the center so that the duel took place nearer or farther from him. Gradually, as he became more adept at controlling the fighter's speed, direction of movement, orientation, and weapons, the game was made more complex. He might have 2 enemy ships at once. There might be obstacles, the debris of space. He began to have to worry about fuel and limited weapons. The computer began to assign him particular things to destroy or accomplish, so that he had to avoid distractions and achieve an objective in order to win. When he had mastered the one-fighter game, they allowed him to step back into the 4-fighter squadron. He spoke commands to simulated pilots of 4 fighters, and instead of merely carrying out the computer's instructions, he was allowed to determine tactics himself, deciding which of several objectives was the most valuable and directing his squadron accordingly. At any time, he could take personal command of one of the fighters for a short time, and at first he did this often. When he did, however, the other 3 fighters in his squadron were soon destroyed, and as the games became harder and harder, he had to spend more and more of his time commanding the squadron. When he did, he won more and more often. By the time he had been at command school for a year, he was adept at running the simulator at any of 15 levels, from controlling an individual fighter to commanding a fleet. He had long since realized that as the battle room was to battle school, so the simulator was to command school. The classes were valuable, but the real education was the game. People dropped in from time to watch him play. They never spoke. Hardly anyone ever did unless they had something specific to teach him. The watchers would stay, silently watching him run through a difficult simulation, and then leave just as he finished. "What are you doing?" he wanted to ask. "Judging me? Determining whether you want to trust the fleet to me? Just remember that I didn't ask for it." He found that a great deal of what he had learned at battle school transferred to the simulator. He would routinely reorient the simulator every few minutes, rotating it so that he didn't get trapped into an up-down orientation, constantly reviewing his position from the enemy point of view. It was exhilarating at last to have such control over the battle, to be able to see every point of it. It was also frustrating to have so little control, too, for the computer-controlled fighters were only as good as the computer allowed. They took no initiative. They had no intelligence. He began to wish for his toon leaders so that he could count on some of the squadrons doing well without having his constant supervision. At the end of his first year, he was winning every battle on the simulator, and played the game as if the machine were a natural part of his body. One day, eating a meal with Graf, he asked, "Is that all the simulator does?" "Is what all?" "The way it plays now. It's easy, and it hasn't got any harder for a while." "Oh." Graf seemed unconcerned, but then Graf always seemed unconcerned. The next day, everything changed. Graf went away, and in his place they gave Ender a companion. He was in the room when Ender awoke the next morning. He was an old man, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Ender looked at him expectantly, waiting for the man to speak. He said nothing. Ender got up and showered and dressed, content to let the man keep his silence if he wanted. He had long since learned that when something unusual was going on, something that was part of someone else's plan and not his own, he would find out more information by waiting than by asking. Adults almost always lost their patience before Ender did. The man still hadn't spoken when Ender was ready and went to the door to leave the room. The door didn't open. Ender turned to face the man sitting on the floor. He looked to be about 60, by far the oldest man Ender had seen on Eros. He had a day's growth of white whiskers that grizzled his face only slightly less than his close-cut hair. His face sagged a little, and his eyes were surrounded by creases and lines. He looked at Ender with an expression that bespoke only apathy. Ender turned back to the door and tried again to open it. "All right," he said, giving up. "Why's the door locked?" The old man continued to look at him blankly. So this is a game, thought Ender. Well, if they want me to go to class, they'll unlock the door, and if they don't, they won't. I don't care. Ender didn't like games where the rules could be anything and the objective was known to them alone, so he wouldn't play. He also refused to get angry. He went through a relaxing exercise as he leaned on the door, and soon he was calm again. The old man continued to watch him impassively. It seemed to go on for hours, Ender refusing to speak, the old man seeming to be a mindless mute. Sometimes Ender wondered if he were mentally ill, escaped from some medical ward somewhere in Eros, living out some insane fantasy here in Ender's room. But the longer it went on, with no one coming to the door, no one looking for him, the more certain he became that this was something deliberate, meant to disconcert him. Ender did not want to give the old man the victory. To pass the time, he began to do exercises. Some were impossible without the gym equipment, but others, especially from his personal defense class, he could do without any aids. The exercises moved him around the room. He was practicing lunges and kicks. One move took him near the old man, as he had come near him before, but this time the old claw shot out and seized Ender's left leg in the middle of a kick. It pulled Ender off his feet and landed him heavily on the floor. Ender leapt to his feet immediately, furious. He found the old man sitting calmly, cross-legged, not breathing heavily, as if he had never moved. Ender stood poised to fight. But the other's immobility made it impossible for Ender to attack. What, kick the old man's head off? And then explain it to Graf. Oh, the old man kicked me and I had to get even. He went back to his exercises. The old man kept watching. Finally, tired and angry at this wasted day, a prisoner in his room, Ender went back to his bed to get his desk. As he leaned over to pick up the desk, he felt a hand jab roughly between his thighs and another hand grab his hair. In a moment he had been turned upside down. His face and shoulders were being pressed into the floor by the old man's knee, while his back was excruciatingly bent and his legs were pinioned by the old man's arm. Ender was helpless to use his arms. He couldn't bend his back to gain slack so he could use his legs. In less than 2 seconds, the old man had completely defeated Ender Wiggin. "All right," Ender gasped. "You win." The man's knee thrust painfully downward. "Since when," asked the man, his voice soft and rasping, "do you have to tell the enemy when he has won?" Ender remained silent. "I surprised you once, Ender Wiggin. Why didn't you destroy me immediately afterward? Just because I looked peaceful? You turned your back on me. Stupid. You have learned nothing. You have never had a teacher." Ender was angry now, and made no attempt to control or conceal it. "I've had too many teachers. How was I supposed to know you'd turn out to be an enemy, Ender Wiggin?" whispered the old man. "I am your enemy, the first one you've ever had who was smarter than you. There is no teacher but the enemy. No one but the enemy will teach you what the enemy is going to do. No one but the enemy will ever teach you how to destroy and conquer. Only the enemy shows you where you are weak. Only the enemy tells you where he is strong. And the rules of the game are what you can do to him or what you can stop him from doing to you. I am your enemy from now on. From now on, I am your teacher." Then the old man let Ender's legs fall. Because he still held Ender's head to the floor, the boy couldn't use his arms to compensate, and his legs hit the surface with a loud crack and a sickening pain. Then the old man stood and let Ender rise.